Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello and welcome everybody to this fresh episode of The Secret Witch Show. And I am super excited today because by the time you're listening to this, I will have just got married in Bali. I'm so excited. I'm heading off on a wild adventure with my little family. My little baby girl who, well, she's almost 4 now. In fact, she will be 4 by the time this episode airs. And I'm just so appreciative of how this wisdom, this like embodiment of my healing witch has allowed me to create this life that I get to be in this adventure. So I'm just feeling today as I record this, just so deeply appreciative of the journey of what we're going to be talking to here today about, like how to harness universal laws of healing to become a healer. You'll hear me talk about the universal law of creation. Like, I am so appreciative for this healing wisdom, for this creative wisdom, to have been able to create this as my life. So I just wanted to celebrate that as we dive in, and to invite you, as ever, because probably I was thinking about what's the best way that people can dive in this month. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be in the Secret Witch Sisterhood. So if you would like to connect with just me, but like our family, our sisterhood, our community this month, I invite you to head to our Secret Witch Sisterhood over on Facebook, which you can find by searching Secret Witch Society, and head on over there and join us. I would love, love, love to connect with you in there. On the Secret Witch Show today, though, I am discussing how to harness universal laws of healing in order to become a healer. I explore the interesting intersection of science and magic, highlighting the importance of acknowledging universal laws and principles that are often overlooked by conventional scientific paradigms. The episode illuminates various healing laws such as the law of similars, the law of direction of cure, the law of potency, and the law of return of old symptoms, among many others, including the law of creation, stressing the importance of understanding these laws for true magical healing rather than quick fixes. In this episode, I explore the importance of seeing that there are laws built into magic and that true magical healing is an inside-out process grounded in universal truth. I invite listeners to observe how these universal laws manifest in your own lives and the practice of healing, inspiring you to embrace your magical gifts and navigate the sphere of your magic with love. And the unapologetic, mysterious magic of Archetypal Remedy, Luna. Let's dive in. Welcome to The Secret Witch Show. Today, I am super excited to be diving into how to harness the universal laws of healing to become a healer. And I'm recording this actually before I head off to Bali. And I realised that I have all this wisdom about what I call the universal laws of healing within me. I rarely share. And I began sharing this recently in some written posts, but I thought it'd be amazing to do a show about it because so often women doubt that magic is real. And I think one of the reasons for that is because science really struggles to kind of define magic. It's one of those things that is like super feminine, it's this full of mystery, it's full of magic, and science really struggles being masculine with kind of measuring what is real. And science also decided how it was going to measure what is real and what wasn't. So science kind of invented its own paradigm, if you like, to measure itself, and then said everything that wasn't that is invalid. So it's no wonder that magical women who are aspiring to be healers kind of feel that deep call to their gifts, to magic, to magical healing, and then almost like shut down in fear, because it's like the rest of the world is saying that's invalid. And so seeing that in and of itself, I think, is super important for secret witches and aspiring healers, because doubt of magic is one of the fears that arises when we begin to embrace our gifts, or even think about embracing our gifts. And Archetypal Luna is a great symbol that helps us to begin to heal this. Archetypal Luna being one of the surface layer remedies that weaves into our path, that helps women to kind of learn to embrace their magic, learn to embrace their mystery. Think of the moon as a symbol of feminine mystery. That's what she's here to help us heal. So this episode is kind of very Archetypal Luna based, and it helps us to begin to know that magic isn't entirely non-scientific. There's kind of fundamental laws and principles that are kind of universally applied, fundamental truths in all walks of life. And it's why we will see the same patterns showing up for healing in our personal lives, as in our healing gifts, as in our businesses, as in our careers, and the same patterns showing up across different groups of people. And so ultimately, like, universal laws are really helpful to know about. And I'm excited for this topic because I love universal laws. Really realised that how much I love them until I started talking about them recently. I was like, oh, this is really juicy and it's rarely talked about. So I'm going to talk to them mainly from the perspective of my lineage, which is namely homeopathy. That's kind of one of the ancient wisdom bodies, I call them, that underlies my path. There's three of them. There's also archetypal psychology and energy healing. And there are other magical principles also woven in, but largely I'm talking to them from a homeopathic lens. So, for example, the law of attraction, that's probably more widely known. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But generally, I'm going to be coming from the laws that kind of woven into the homeopathic wisdom lens. And some witches who might be listening might be familiar with some of the more occult philosophy principles already. If you're listening to this, you don't have to be a practicing witch. So I'm just kind of presencing this for the purpose of those who do know. But for example, I've got the Kabbalion here, which is all about the universal principles. And you might be familiar with things like as above, so below, as below, so above, law of correspondence. These are the kind of things that we mean when we're talking about universal laws, universal principles. Or you might be familiar with kind of vibration, the law of vibration: nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Or polarity: everything has poles, everything has opposites. We'll talk to some of these. I really want to focus in on the ones that kind of embodied in the homeopathic lineage, because you will likely see some of them overlap with other universal laws in other lineages. For example, my own guide, one of my guides was a shaman. And she and I have taught for various years about universal laws and how they are kind of described, the same universal principle described in different ways. And I think that ultimately is like really warming for the parts of our heart that doubt that magic is real. It's like, okay, this law is showing up here, 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 and here. And it's like, there's got to be something in that. And so ultimately, that's what we're diving into today. And ultimately, there's so many different universal laws, and it's not something that many people talk about. Yet they are so baked in. Like, I feel like they're integral. They're integral to the archetypal apothecary path that I serve. And I realised again that I never really talked about them. And yet my whole path is designed around these universal laws of healing. The whole modality is designed around that. And they were all very much in my head. You know, I've studied the art and science of healing to virtually degree level. So there's, you know, a deep dive into the universal healing laws. And I think one of the challenges, as just going back to what I was saying at the beginning, is that energy medicine in and of itself offers so much, and yet it's often not seen as scientific. And the reason why we began to study this when I was studying homeopathy is that homeopathy itself is seen as this very kind of magical, almost like there's no explanation for it. And so over the years, it's kind of made very little sense to people, particularly when we're used to a very scientific, very logical, very understandable cure and fix. And so there's often been this question, particularly within the homeopathic community, or people coming into the homeopathic community, people trying homeopathy to work with, is this idea of like, why did a sugary ball that's been coated with something where the material original substance has been diluted to the point that it no longer exists, why did that help me heal? And that's something that comes up for people who are maybe just beginning to work with homeopathy. And this isn't just about homeopathy, this is about magic as a whole. Again, homeopathy is my lineage, but it's also only part of it. But like, there's this deeper question I think that women have. It's like, why did magic work? Why has magic worked? And of course, when you stop using the pills and working with them energetically, these as archetypal remedies, these homeopathic remedies, like I do, which because I serve homeopathy in a very different way to how most people do. It's like my own kind of spin on it that's combined with archetypes and energy healing. Like, it starts to make even less sense, which makes it so much more important to talk about the universal laws, because in essence, all of it is grounded in magic. All of it is grounded in principles and laws. And science is kind of almost like catching up to universal laws in some ways, which sounds a strange thing to say because universal laws are part of science, but it's almost like the laws, the kind of almost like overarching laws kind of know how magic works. And science is now starting to catch up with some of these universal laws and concepts and be able to describe things in more detail. A great example of that is the concept of miasms in homeopathy. And miasms are essentially what I would call the ancestral wounds, the ancestral layers, the ancestral remedies. Those things that are being passed down, the ancestral wounds being passed down through the lineage, is now beginning to be explained by science through the language of epigenetics. Now, homeopathy talked about miasms for years before epigenetics became a thing. And yet it's virtually the same thing. For example, the witch wound. We're talking about how women were burned at the stake as witches, and how that in magical ones kind of passes down through the line, and we still feel in our body, in our cells, the impacts, the fear of that witch wound. Because what happened was, when people were going through burning times, that fear was kind of imprinted into our DNA. It changed our DNA, and then that got passed down, literally through epigenetics. Our DNA changed. For years, everyone thought that homeopathy or magic was unexplainable. And yet it's grounded in these fundamental laws, which are just now starting to be able to be explained by science to a degree. And there's so much I could go off on. That I wrote a whole post about the miasm of our time, or the ancestral wounding of our time, and folliculinum, which is made from estrogen, being the miasm of the lost connection to the feminine. So if you're interested in all that sort of thing, I wrote a great article on that. It was very popular. It is on our blog. So if you head to nicolebarton.co.uk/blog, you'll find that one about the ancestral wounding of our time, and how essentially what I see is the pill has changed our hormones and changed our DNA, and kind of been passed down, and having this kind of lost connection to the feminine. That's kind of a sidetrack. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But in essence, universal laws are serving to know about, particularly when we're wanting to become a healer. And so we can look to these universal laws to explain things for us. They're universal law of principles, are things which everyone and everything in the universe is governed by. A law is universal if it states that this is a definition, is if it states that some conditions, so far as known, invariably are found together with certain other conditions. A law is an existing condition that is binding, immutable, fixed, and cannot be changed. It just is. A universe is a system of energy, and energy appearing as physical matter. Universal law is the set of natural, non-man-made, and immutable conditions that determine how reality and consequence operate within the realm that humans exist in. In essence, another definition is universal law determines the nature and characteristics of energy in the physical reality we experience. So they're universal laws that explain how life works. It's the main takeaway. And so what are some of the magical universal laws? I'm going to talk through a few of them that are kind of woven in. I feel fundamental to that journey of becoming a healer, because I think, again, so often we're taught that there's just like these quick fix things to becoming a healer. So many women will land at my path, on my door, and they've journeyed quite deeply with healing, often journeyed quite deeply with kind of more the quick fix healing or a quick fix approach to healing, and that we're taught from the masculine lens, because that's what we're taught by, if you think about going to a doctor, we're taught that we take our ailment, we go to a doctor and they give us something to fix it. And that's often how we innocently, when we start to come into the alternative healing, the natural healing, the energetic healing realm, like we're taught that that's how we interact with it. So we start to innocently, so I've been conditioned, we start to interact with magic in the same way. We start to go, okay, I'm going to go to a magical healer and they're going to fix me. And that doesn't work with magic. It might work to a degree. There's always some healing that's taken away, but I'm going to explore more about how that works later. In essence, when we're going to a healer to expect this same quick fix, we're giving away our power to be able to heal ourselves. And that's really important to learn how to do when we are wanting to become a healer and make a difference with what has helped heal us in the world. And so the universal laws are really helpful to start to begin to really understand real magic, real healing. And the main one that I'm going to talk about first is the law of similars. Now, you may well have heard me talk about this one because it's like fundamental to our path. It's the law of similia similibus, if you've heard me talk about it that way, which ultimately means the law of like cures like. And what that means is that on a basic level, what causes symptoms will also cure them. Now, the most basic of basic examples I can give for that is if, for example, homeopathically, you had a cold, that you had streaming eyes, streaming nose, what would cure that cold is a remedy called allium cepa, which is onion, because onion would cause streaming eyes, streaming nose, and therefore cure those symptoms. That's on a very basic level what the law of similars is talking about. Another example, for healers particularly, that they often resonate with, is the idea of the lens of phosphorus. Phosphorus as an archetypal remedy is what's on the end of a match. So you strike it, it goes up in flames, it burns down. So again, women who are born to be healers tend to burn down like the match. They tend to be fiery, and like cures like. As we start to work with phosphorus, she will help us to cure the burnout and kind of ignite our fire so that we feel passion again, so that we feel alive. So again, like cures like. Again, another one that's a great example if you're listening to this podcast is that the witch. The witch as an archetypal remedy is terrifying. And yet, she also cures the part of us that fears her magic, her power, her femininity. And so archetypes kind of hold up that mirror to help us cure what we fear. Like cures like. And also, so there's that part of it that's really important, that's woven into all that we do. But there's also, like cures like also has a deeper impact for those of you who are really wanting to be a healer, is that essentially what like cures like means is that as healers, we will be a cure or an activating kind of remedy for those like us, those who are similar to us. So this is kind of like the foundation of all that I teach, this universal law, because people essentially are remedies for each other. And this is why our wounds become our gifts, because we journey with them, and as we heal them, we become activating remedy for others. People start to see in us, oh, this is possible. Like, look at what this person has done. She's gone from where I am to where I want to be. And that's made it possible. That becomes a remedy for people. And I know it's quite a radical thing to say that our wounds become our gifts and that we need to go into our wounds in order to become healers, because as aspiring healers, we're often taught that our gifts are external, not that we are the gift, not that we are the remedy. And so this is a hugely important nuance to those other paths out there where we're taught, okay, go and learn Reiki, or go and learn this tool, or go and learn that, and go and learn sound healing. And those aren't not valuable. Like, those are part of your path that you will come to create. You'll weave in those things. So they're not a waste. It's like a yes and. Yes, those tools are great. They're really healing. They activate healing. We'll talk more about that later. But they activate healing, and it's still you that is the deeper real remedy. It's you that will, your kind of heroine's journey that will become the niche for who you serve. And that is hugely important in owning your journey of becoming a healer. Like, this like cures like principle is fundamental to understand how to become a healer and how to serve who we're here to serve. So that's the first universal law that's like so deeply important. If we're not working with a path that has that law of similars, that like cures like, the similia similibus principle woven into it, it's going to be very challenging for us to become the healer that we long to be, to make a difference in the world in the way that we long to. Okay. The second law of universal law of magic is, and these aren't in any particular order, they're just what came to me, is Herring's law of direction of cure. Now, Herring's law of direction of cure is talking about how this kind of misconception that we fix the external. Herring's law of direction of cure states that we work in true healing, in real healing, we work from the inner to the outer. Inner to outer being the optimal direction of cure, and physicals being a manifestation of our inner world. So you'd have heard maybe even Louise Hay talking about how things are being manifest and expressed in the body because there's a kind of deeper emotional or inner reason. This is that kind of law of direction of cure. That's what we are creating, experiencing, manifesting in our bodies is a reflection of our inner world. And to heal, we need to go into that inner world and start to illuminate what's going on, illuminate the deeper patterns so that we can begin to heal from the inside out. It's also, direction of cure also describes that physically, healing happens top to bottom, top down. So you might find that the way that as you go into real healing, that you start to experience things clearing that way. And also, healing is inside out. Is the main thing of this, the main principle of this. So that's what we talked about first. The main kind of misconception is that we fix the external. We don't. Healing is really about loving parts of our inner world back to wholeness. So healing is very much inside out, and that is kind of woven into, like, Herring's law kind of is like the proof of that. Herring's law describes how healing truly happens. And again, we've been taught the opposite of that. We've been taught that we need to fix the external, that we need to sticky plaster over, that we need to go and get a plaster for certain things. And the real healing is inner. And that was very much my own experience. In everything I've healed, I have had all sorts of things that I've healed magically, from chronic fatigue syndrome to to gestational diabetes, to my thyroid, to my paralyzed face. There's all sorts of things that I have healed by working with this inside out way of healing. So I know in my bones that this law is true for me. And I've seen it true for others. So, but again, when I'm talking about these universal laws, that's a really great point, is that don't just take my word for it. Start to play with these universal laws yourself. See what you can notice about how they operate. See where they're operating in life. Because that's the best way to get experience with these. Now, the third universal law of magic that is woven into our path and that really feels important is the law of layers of healing. Now, this is mostly evident and mostly explainable through our soul map. So the overall law is essentially saying that there are different layers of our healing, that we work through different layers. And the way I describe this often is, if you imagine, going back to onion analogies, because what's better than an onion analogy, is that if you imagine us like an onion, right at the core is who we were born as. And then we've got different layers of wounding over the top that make us who we are today. And essentially, like, the work of healing is peeling back those layers until we get back to who we were at the core. And so our soul map that we work with, soul reading journey that I do, kind of works with these different layers. And it's been very much fundamentally designed around a model called Isiaga's layers model. And that's a homeopathic philosophy again. It's a homeopathic approach. But I started to see, as I was working with women and exploring their gifts and exploring their healing, that there are these kind of 4 different layers of archetypal remedies that we work with in order to become who we truly are, become who our soul came here to be, become the healers that we came here to be. And so there's kind of these different layers, if you like, 4 layers of our healing that the layers of healing law kind of speaks to. And I talk about these in different ways. So the first being surface layer. These are the outer layers that kind of like the layers we need to peel back in order to kind of get closer to who we are. I talk about our soul remedy layer. That is our core wound, our deepest wound that we are here to serve in the world. I talk about ancestral layers as well. These are the kind of those miasmatic, the ancestral wounds that have been passed down that we need to heal. And then also we have our birth constitution. That's who we were born as, right at the core of the onion. So it's like these different layers, and this universal law of healing around different layers of our healing really explains that there are these different layers in essence that we need to heal, and also we tend to work backwards through those. So we'll start with the surface layer. And we'll move inwards to the deeper layers, and ancestral layers being last as well. So people tend to rush. Again, we're conditioned like, oh, the juicy bits, ancestral healing, let's rush there. That sounds really fun. And then we rush there and we get almighty, what I call material for liberation. We'll have healing responses. We'll talk to that more because it's another universal law. So I'm not going to go into that right now. But it sounds exciting to go into ancestral healing. It sounds really fun. It's like, yeah, juicy. I'm going to heal my ancestral wounds. And yet it needs to come last, because we have to also, it makes sense from a perspective, like we have to learn how to heal ourselves to be able to hold the wounds of our ancestors. Otherwise, we're just going to be really operating from a wounded place. And so those are the kind of, when we talk about the universal laws of layers of healing, there is an order to our healing, in essence, is what that's saying. And often that order is done backwards in society. We rush to do all of the work instead of going, okay, what's aligned? What's the first place to look? Let's slow down and go in order of the different layers of healing that are needed. Let's start with those tender surface wounds and peel back the layers, rather than rushing to the bits that should come last, according to the universal law of layers of healing. It's a juicy one. Yeah. The next law, universal law of magic, is the law of return of old symptoms. Now, I love this law. This law is one of my favorites. Like, seriously. And it sounds a weird one to be a favorite, but it's something that I have got deep experience of. And the healing power of return of old symptoms is amazing. Now, if you have been, if you've been treated by a homeopath or by me as a homeopath in the past, I tend to work with them as archetypal remedies now, and this has the same impact, by the way. If you've ever experienced a healing, let's just call it any healing, and then the next day you've got maybe the same thing that you had 10 years ago, or you've got the same wound coming up that you had 10 years ago. This is called a return of old symptoms. And what it is old things coming back up for our healing reclamation of them. You could also call it material for liberation. Though material for liberation is slightly different. I often talk about material for liberation like this is coming up for our liberation after an activation to be worked with, to be made conscious. But in essence, the way that I have journeyed with all these archetypal remedies is I will activate a remedy, and then I will I'll be taken back to the exact point in time of when I had the original wound. And it's almost like I've literally been transported there and shown where my healing is. It's really powerful. But I remember laughing because when I had a paralyzed face, and it's hilarious thinking back to even the fact that I was laughing about this, but I remember having an acupuncture treatment in my face. And I went to the acupuncture, and the next day my face was worse. And I went back to them and I said, oh, my face is worse. And they go, oh my God, like this is not good. And I was like, no, it's all good. Like this is brilliant. It's taken me back. This is a return of old symptoms. This is a sign that it's working. Now I know that is radical. The healer herself, like, almost fell off her chair. She was like, oh, because she wasn't aware of this fundamental universal law of healing. So she was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know this. And I'm like, this is great. That is so radical. Like, but the belief I have in this universal principle, because of all the ways that I have journeyed with return of old symptoms before, like, to me, this was positive. This was a great thing, that those symptoms have got worse before they got better. And I guess the reason why I share this, because it feels such an important one for healers to be aware of, is that in essence, activations, we outsource again, we go to other healers, and there's not to say that we don't go to other healers. Like, what I'm saying is that we need to learn to interact with going to other healers in a different way. So say, for example, we go to have a shamanic healing or a homeopathic treatment or Reiki or whatever it is that we love. We go, and instead of being in a relationship where we're passing over the power and be like, okay, you fixed me now, we see that healing as an activation, as the beginning of the healing, not the fix. Because that's ultimately what's happening, is that when we have that activation, it's beginning it. It might then create a return of old symptoms. It might create some material for liberation. And as long as we can hold it that way and see that this is a universal law, that means the healing is actually working, and now it's our responsibility to work with that healing response. There is so much power, so much healing, self-healing power reclaimed in that. So this universal law, I think, is fundamental for everybody to know, for everybody in the world to be aware of. And if you're a healer, it is our duty to let people know that this is good. This is what happens in this kind of healing. And so essentially, when we have an activation, it can create a healing response. Now, that healing response is for us to work with more deeply. And of course, there's always exceptions to the rule where it might not be something that is a healing response and it's just something that has just gotten worse. So it's important to discern that. But ultimately, like, seeing this general process of, like, we have a healing, sometimes that will have a healing response. That healing response is for us to work with more deeply, for integration. And this is why integration is so important in our archetypal apothecary path. There are no quick fixes here. There is not an activation, off you go, you're healed. There is activation, off you go, it's time to integrate. And I will guide you through that integration. Generally, if you're in one of our group programs, there is the integration inbuilt into that. And this is why this fundamental law of return of old symptoms is why that is my group programs are, and all my work generally is created with some level of support for integration. Because in fact, quick fixes are actually quite dangerous to real healing, because what will happen is they will still have the same activation, but they kind of leave people unsupported in their healing, thinking that the healing has already happened, when it will actually perhaps bring up some return of old symptoms or material for liberation to be journeyed with, that people need that support in. And the other day, I was, this is quite a vulnerable share, I was speaking to an event space that I was doing some events with, and they suggested that that I shouldn't be promoting or sharing or inviting women into deeper journeys once I'd done a workshop with them, because it felt to them that I was piggybacking on doing a workshop with them. And I said to them, I courageously shared my vulnerable truth from love, in that I'm not a quick fix practitioner. Like, all very well, like, people can choose into journeying with my workshops as a quick fix if that is how people want to interact with healing. And for me, the reason I will share some journey, I map out my year to share, make sure that I'm sharing things where there's something for people to deepen into, is because I know this universal law of return of old symptoms or material for liberation will come up. And if people want deeper support with that, I'm going to offer them deeper support with that in some kind of group journey, in some kind of held space. Even if that's an accessible group journey, there's always the option of going deeper, of course. So some people want to work one-to-one and have that deeper support and deeper holding in that. But I'm not going to offer a workshop without some kind of deeper integration support option. That's absolutely fine. If people don't want to join that option, there's no pressure to. But this universal law is the reason why I create in that way. And so I shared that with them, because so many other healers will not offer that. And it's deeply important. It's deeply important. And that wasn't coming from a place of me wanting to piggyback on it. It was coming from a place of deep service to women who may want to actually be supported in whatever comes up for them around return of old symptoms or material for liberation. And that is, I'm going to stand in that integrity, despite that particular event space not liking what I was sharing. Like, I'm going to just stand true in my authentic kind of expression of, like, this is what I believe. Like, I know this universal law to be true. Therefore, anybody who kind of doesn't support that it's not going to be aligned to co-create with moving forwards. And the universal laws are so important to me because I know them to be true. Like, this one, it's especially so. Like, I have had all the return of old symptoms, all the material for liberation over the years. And so it is absolutely, like, paramount to me that women are supported in their journeys of healing. And just to go back to return of old symptoms and how that's slightly different to material for liberation. Return of old symptoms literally returns an old symptom. That happened to me each time I took a remedy, each time I worked with an archetype. It happens to me when I have a shamanic healing. It happens to me whatever healing I have, some kind of return of old symptoms, like being transported back to the wound, and I will just explode. I explode briefly, and it's like, okay, what's here to work with? And I actually secretly get a little kink out of it. It feels like that's just how I work with healing. It's quite dramatic at times, but that's just me. That's just how I work. And so that's return of old symptoms. Material for liberation is something that we've almost like called in by working with an archetypal remedy to reveal where our work is. So it's like we call in the remedy and they will show us through what I call our material for liberation what patterns we are to more deeply work with for our healing. So it's like illuminating a pattern for us to work with for liberation. One of my clients said that this is more like FML. And I had ironically written that a couple of years back as well, so shared that post with her. But I agree, it tends to feel like FML. But as we learn to move from FML to MFL, material for liberation, it is really healing. So that's probably one of my favourite universal laws, the return of old symptoms or material for liberation. Let's move on. Let's move on to the law of minimum dose. And And this, again, is a deeply, deeply important one that I often see in other kind of, in other healing spaces, that there's kind of like this rush to heal, rush to activate different things. And in essence, the law of minimum dose, so I think it's called the law of single dose as well, is about working with one single remedy archetype at a time, one single thing, slowing down our healing. One of the, again, universal fundamental principles of homeopathy is that it should be rapid, permanent, and gentle. So the gentleness piece, although rapid sounds the opposite of slow, the gentleness piece is really what we're talking to here, like slowing down. Like, it can be rapid in that it can have an immediate, like that return of all, that punchy, snappy return of old symptoms that comes in and then dies down and you see what's there. Like, that's rapid, that's permanent, probably doesn't feel as gentle, but ultimately that's what we're aiming for, is that sense of gentleness, that sense of slowing down, that sense of, again, our integration, allowing the space for integration. The healing quick fix is really just the initiation into our healing. So we are being called to work with that initiation for at least a month. I say to women, work with one remedy for 1 month minimum. Do not be packing in all the remedies at once. When people have a soul reading, their tendency is like, okay, let's activate all of these. And I'm like, no, let's slow it down. We're not going to be activating all of it, because if you activate all of it, you're not going to know what remedy is creating what material for liberation or return for all the symptoms. Like, we're not going to be able to see what remedy is doing what, and it's going to just create a load of material for liberation. So this universal law is very much around not rushing our healing. Slow down. Don't go activating multiple remedies at once or multiple initiations at once. I see this a lot in archetypal healing, where people will innocently work with many different archetypes in one go. Again, is how we're conditioned. Like, faster is better. But that is still very much the masculine paradigm of rush, force, fix, do. The more we activate, the more material for liberation or return of old symptoms we will receive. Simple. So if you're good with feeling like you're in a washing machine, in all that material for liberation, go knock yourself out. You won't know, though, what is healing what. I see this a lot in what I call goddess dress-up paths, where we kind of just play with the embodiment piece. Like, we're calling in the goddess. We're going to expect from the goddess, like, deep material for liberation to show us. Material for liberation essentially shows us where we're not embodied as the archetypal remedy that we're longing to be embodied as. If you're going to also activate remedies that are like deep, deep, deep potency and really far away from where we are, we're going to expect deep, deep, deep potency, material for liberation, return of old symptoms. So don't rush. Let's work with single remedy, single initiation, single activation for a month, and slow it down. Like, that is what's important in real healing. And again, this is important for us to know, because we're healing our healer, we're healing ourselves so that we can make a difference in the world. But it's also important for those who come to us for healing to know. Like, that's important, because everybody is tempted to rush. Now, the other thing that we've just kind of started to allude to, this next universal law, that again is so important, particularly for healers, for aspiring healers to know about, is the law of potency. As healers, I don't think I've ever seen this taught to aspiring healers. Like, this is very rarely spoken about. And what in the law of potency means is that essentially we have to match the energy of a person in the remedy we serve. We have to match the energy of a person in the remedy we serve. Now, I'm going to see if I can find an example of this, but in essence, like, people will do this kind of like one fits all solution often in healing. And that isn't going to work for everybody. People need different potencies. They need different levels of healing. They need different kind of, like, some people will need a lower dose. Some people will need a really high dose. And to be able to start to learn to read that is when we become a real healer. And so what I'm always feeling into is I'm working with women in their healing of their healer, and in their own kind of becoming of a healer, is I will guide women into reading their potency, reading the energy of a person, and seeing, okay, do they need more or less of a remedy? And adjusting the potency that we're serving through our words, through our body, through our expression. Do they need more love? Do they need more truth? And those are kind of the two things that I see that's impacting the potency. Is the best way that I can describe it, is do they need more love and more truth? People need different potencies. If I was talking about homeopathically, I'd be talking about with the difference between C potency and M potency. Now, that probably means very little to you, but in essence, C potency, so we typically have 30C, 200C if we're working with homeopathic remedies. Those are kind of lower potency. 30 is the lowest. 200 is a little bit punchy, but still fairly low. And then you've got M, so you'd have 1M and 10M. There's others as well in between, but those are typically the traditional potencies. Now, M's are super potent. 1M would be slightly more gentle, 10M would be the most potent. So it's kind of 30C, 200C, 1M, 10M. And I kind of break it down that way because I see like where people need different potencies. So for example, if I'm serving a manifesting with the moon, new moon event, and I'm hosting and guiding women into ritual journeys, which, by the way, if you haven't joined, they're free, usually once a month. And you can find out more at our website about the moon rituals. When I'm serving those, I'm going to be conscious of not only what do people need, but because it's a group situation, I can't tell what they need. And they're not going to be supported in integration. So I'll be serving intentionally through how I create the ritual and the experience. I'll be intentionally serving that as a 30C, the lowest potency, because it gives some level of activation, but it's an activation that people can journey with themselves. If you're in my group journeys, I'll probably be serving like a 1M. And I remember putting a 1M she-wolf on my altar just behind me, actually. I remember having that, and so that tends to be like much deeper work, because again, we're fully supported. The women who have chosen into it are generally like really committed and devoted. So if they have material of liberation coming up, that's what we're there for. If you're a one-to-one client, I'm probably going to be working with you at 10M level, the deepest, most highest potency. But that depends as well. It's very nuanced, because, for example, if I'm working with someone who is one-to-one, but they're depleted on energy, they're low on energy, they will still probably need a 30C. And so I'm constantly meeting people in where they're at. So if somebody's depleted and low on energy, they're going to be needing a lower potency, 30C, to match their energy. If somebody's super energetic, then we'll need a 10M. There's more truth wrapped in love, but slightly more truth than love. If they're depleted, there's going to be lots and lots and lots of love wrapped around the truth. And this is kind of how we work with changing the remedy and meeting someone where they're at. There's also like a deeper level that is a little bit too deep as we're starting to work with this. But for those who are more deep in my path, there's like a deeper reading of somebody's energy, their constitutional energy. Like, are they constitutionally high potency? And even if they are depleted, can they take that high potency? That was me. When I was very depleted with chronic fatigue, I was still a high potency person, because ultimately my energetic could take the high potency. But there's a whole thing around serving remedies with potency. And when I say remedies, serving our medicine, just simply being who we are, is medicine for people. When we're in our truth, when we're literally being the full expression of our remedy, when we're fully expressing ourselves, that is us being a remedy. And so we need to learn how to work with expressing wildly from our truth, but also how to adapt that truth and that potency through the way that we bring that into the world with love. And healers need to learn how to serve their remedy with the potency each individual needs. Is ultimately the sense of that universal law of potency. again, something that's woven into the path that's deeply important. The next one is, of course, the law of attraction and creation. One of the principles, one of the elements of our path, if you like, is manifestation. Now, the law of attraction, or the law of creation, as I've also heard it talked about and kind of prefer, actually, it's so misunderstood. The law of manifestation is so misunderstood. It is taught as there's something to do. Like, we need to just make a wish. Instead of seeing that we're really already doing it. We're creating already. It's just that largely we're creating from wounding, or we're creating from shadow, rather than creating from love and truth. And this one was a big one for me, because I had spent years trying to manifest, doing, pushing, like affirmation, all the things, vision boards. And I was burning myself out with vision boards and affirmations. And it wasn't until I began to see that true magic is in seeing we are already creating. We're largely creating from our wounds, which is why illuminating our wounds is so important, especially for healers who want to manifest magical lives as healers. It opens us to what's possible when we move our creation to be from love. And this universal law is why our focus in this path is on healing the healer, because as we start to heal the unconscious healer wounds that we have from the inside out, so that we can learn to focus more deeply on creating from love and truth, that means that we're creating from a different place. This circles back to that piece I was saying earlier about symptoms in the body manifesting from the inside. Essentially, that's what's happening. Whatever we are feeling on the inside will manifest. That's already being created. There's no doing in that. That's just how it works. Like, when we are manifesting what we don't want, it's a sign that there's something that we need to go in and look at, so that we can see what the wound is that's creating for us. And so this is a very big principle, this law of creation, law of attraction, law of manifestation, that is so deeply misunderstood and yet so important in the journey of becoming a healer. So that is also woven into the path that we do, and also a law that we can start to harness to become a healer, to have more impact as a healer by healing the parts of ourselves that are wounded, taking radical responsibility for those parts so that we can learn to love those parts of us and create differently. There's only a couple more that I want to briefly speak to. The second to last one that I'm going to speak about today, there are hundreds of, I'm sure, universal laws, but these are my favourite, is the law of polarity. I'm not going to talk too much to this because this one isn't so homeopathic, but it's something that is woven into our path. And essentially, the Kybalion talks about it as like everything exists on a continuum of opposites and can be moved or changed. And where this shows up in our path is that when we talk about wounding, and particularly about, seeing our wounding so that we can manifest differently, the law of polarity kind of comes in, because what we will start to see, and what people who've journeyed with me will already be familiar with, is the way that we work is by seeing that there are shadow poles. And as we start to heal our healer, we'll start to see where these shadow poles are showing up, and we're swinging from one end to the other and back up, and almost like on this pendulum of like poles. So the greatest example is one that we've been working with in She-Wolf recently in our journey with Archetypal Looper, which is She-Wolf. Is one of her wounds as an archetypal remedy is this kind of movement from good girl to rebel. Good girl to rebel. Good girl to rebel. And women will kind of swing between those two poles, thinking that when they've stopped being the good girl and moved into rebel, that they've healed. Now, it's just the opposite end of the pole. So we can go from good girl to rebel, and we're taught that rebel is healed because we should be wild women, they should be rebellious, like it's like sod you, I'm going to do what I want. This is still on the shadow pole. The law of polarity shows us that the opposite is still wounding. And we can move and change. And the deeper aim of the work that we do in this path is not to swing to the opposite end of the pole, but to notice the swing between good girl and rebel and see that both of these are wounding. And there's a deeper place of soul that we can manifest from. I'm not going to talk any more than that because that feels like quite a lot to go into. But in essence, law of polarity. There's also the law of vibrations. This is the last one I'm going to speak about today in today's episode. But the law of vibration, also called in homeopathic terms, the law of succussion, the law of dynamization, is this kind of idea that everything vibrates, that we need movement to dynamize something. So, for example, in homeopathic terms, we shake remedies to energize them to the right potency. Again, something about meeting the energy of a person, but it also reminds me of Peter Levine's work about waking the tiger. And this is something I've been playing with in how I serve archetypal remedies, because again, it brings it back to that embodiment piece, that sense of like succussion, dynamization, shaking. And it's just, again, kind of woven into the path, in that there's that kind of vibrational energy medicine piece in there. I'm not going to speak any more on that because it feels like complete for what I wanted to share in this episode. But essentially, there are so many more laws than I've even covered here. But these are kind of the main ones that feel deeply important to me, that have been woven into our path to help healers become healers that are harnessing real magic rather than quick fixes. And my fundamental view is that without a true understanding of these laws, or at least having walked a path where they've been woven in, we can struggle to become the healers that we long to be. It's like there's only like the quick fix route that's not embedded in real magic, that has the depth of like real healing. It's like there's an art and science in these universal laws and principles. It maybe doesn't map to exactly how science wants to be able to measure magic at this point. Partly, some of it does. And so that can be challenging to wrap our kind of brilliant minds around, particularly for those who are intelligent, logical secret witches who feel that kind of strange heart call. We're so not used to following our hearts. But we'll feel this kind of strange call to becoming a healer. It makes very little logical sense. And at that point, we're being called into magic. We're being called into magic, and we will feel all the fear of failure, the fear of self-doubt, the fear of magic not being real. And so it's helpful, I think, I feel, that magic is grounded in some deeply magical universal laws and principles. Like, to know that these are out there, that these explain the reality, the truth, the realness of magic, even if it's not fully explainable, is so healing. And what I would say to you is something that I said earlier on, is that the invitation, as we're talking about, how to harness universal laws of healing to become a healer, is to just start to see where you see these universal laws and principles playing out. To begin to trust in your body and her wisdom. To just start to play and start to notice, like, oh, yeah, that law is showing up here. I'm seeing how I'm creating something from wounding. I'm seeing how that person maybe wanted a different potency. It wasn't received my medicine wasn't received in the way that I desired it to be. Or that person's having a healing response, or I'm having a healing response. Interesting. I would have seen that as something negative, but now I know about the law of return of old symptoms. Like the direction of cure. Oh, I've seen this actually is internal, inside out. Those sorts of things, or like even just like, oh, actually maybe I am a remedy. Like I've just said something and somebody's responded and they're like, oh, that's so inspiring. Like, just notice, just begin to notice like where these universal laws are showing up for you, are showing up in life. And yeah, that's all I've got to offer for today, but it feels like a magical episode. And we are going to be journeying with that in our archetypal lunar journey in October, in terms of like trusting your body, trusting her magical wisdom. And you can, again, like you can feel Luna's medicine, that if you think about like feels like, the moon is a deep symbol of our feminine magic and mystery, which can't really be explained by science, but operates with these key universal laws. So I'll be sharing more about that in due course. You can find all the information on our website when it's up. And I would love to hear what came up for you in this episode, if it feels aligned to share. You are so welcome to join our Secret Witch Society over on Facebook. Many of you do. It's a gorgeous community. So please do, if you're feeling like you want to be kind of held and also journey with other women, other magical women in your path to becoming a healer, then please do join us there. It's a gorgeous community, and you're so welcome to introduce yourself, share what you heard in this episode, what you loved, what you took away, and I will see you next time. I loved that episode. Here are my takeaways. There are lots of universal laws and principles of magic which often get overlooked when magic is dismissed as invalid by science's logical approach. This can have magical women in fear around trusting their gifts, because often magic is more intuitive and mysterious and feminine. Yet science is beginning to catch up and recognise things that magic has explained for years. For example, homeopathic miasms can now be defined by epigenetics. These universal laws are baked into magical healing and teach us so much. For example, the law of similars explores why it is us that is the medicine rather than our tools, because like cures like, people are activated by our story. The law of direction of cure explores that true healing works inner to outer, not by fixing external symptoms. The law of return of old symptoms explores why things can get worse before they get better in the healing process, and why that's a good thing. Overall, it is really interesting to dive into these laws, and it's important to walk a magical healing path that bakes these principles into it. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.